Hello and welcome back. We're going to talk about interdependence, and the gains from trade. I see a hand raised. Are you okay? Spello. I'm sorry, for some reason I can't hear you. I see that you unmuted your mic, but I can't hear anything coming out. I can almost hear you. Hold on. Try again. Now I can't hear you. You might have a connection with your microphone. I'm sorry, for some reason I cannot hear anything coming out of your mic. Can anyone else hear?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you,
Yeah,
but
I hear you well. So
okay, it works. Yeah, Miss Bell, you might want to try your audio connect. Yeah, I don't. You might want to try your audio connection again. So strange. Okay, so let's talk about this interdependence and gains from trade. So uh, trade benefits pretty much everyone for the most part. And remember, trade is the exchange of goods and services between two or more countries. That's what trade means. And we do this for a lot of reasons. We do it for independence and interdependence. And we also, everyone benefits from trade. The reason is because we might have lower labor costs, or we might have lower manufacturing costs, lower or raw materials costs, a lot of different reasons why people benefit from trade. So we'll talk about things like what makes interdependencies, uh, who's better off from trade, absolute advantages, comparative advantages, uh, and how these concepts are similar and different. Interdependence. Yeah, this picture kind of sums it up, doesn't it? If you look in your closet right now and you look at the tags on your clothing, take a look at where they're made. You'll find clothing from Indonesia, Taiwan, China, Pakistan. Uh, Sometimes you'll find them from Vietnam. Uh, Clothing is very efficiently made in the Indonesian region of the world. And the reason for that is because the, those countries, the people are very efficient at making clothing, textiles. They've been doing it for a long time. That's why a lot of silk comes from India. Um, a lot of silk comes from India. There's a lot of different fabrics that come from that part of the world. And so, yeah, you'll notice that your clothing comes from a lot of different places around the world. Your phone probably came from Taiwan. That's where a lot of a large microchip processors make the chips for the phone in Taiwan. And if it didn't come from Taiwan, it may have come from South Korea, or it might have come from uh, parts of California. Uh, your coffee may have come from the coffee beltway through Central Africa, or from uh, or from the northern part of South America or Central America, which is where the majority of the world's coffee comes from. It comes from around the equator. But you'll notice everything in your daily lives, the products, they come from other places. Yeah, they come from all over the world, and we all interact with those products on a daily basis. That's what makes it interdependence, right? We're sharing. The nations are sharing in the resources. The reason why America became so independent on so dependent on China for a lot of things, right? Um, Furniture, clothing, electronics, you name it, right? Almost everything these days seems to be made in China. The reason for that is because it's cheaper to have the products manufactured in China because of lower labor costs and lower materials costs than it is in America, right? That's a benefit that Americans have when they buy products that are made in China. The advantage is the cost is lower. It's good for the Americans. It's also good for China because they'll get the monetary benefit. So they say we're better off. But I'll also say this: there becomes a time when you become too reliant on one country to manufacture so much of your products, and that can become problematic should you ever be faced with something like a global pandemic. Then you realize, wow, I became so over reliant. Now I can't get the stuff from that country because that country is in lockdown. And that's what caused and still ongoing, shortages of products and the supply chain issues, yeah, that we see today as a result of the pandemic is because the United States became too reliant on China for products. So, yeah, it's very interesting. So, a couple of examples of the interdependence: the US and Japan. The US is great at growing wheat. Japan is excellent at making computers. We know that to produce computers and wheat, we need labor hours. So each country has a certain amount of labor hours dedicated to the production of computers and wheat. So we want to look at the relationship between the two countries based on their ability to produce goods and services that are traded with each other. So, United States, we have 50,000 hours available per month. And with that 50,000 hours, we can produce one computer for every 100 hours and 1 ton of wheat for every 10 hours. You remember this example from the last chapter. So here's the US's production. I'm going to say this wrong again. The PPF, Production Possibility Frontier. I got it right this time. Okay, so there's the Production Possibility Frontier for the United States. The difference between the amount of wheat and the amount of computers I can make using the 50,000 hours. Now, let's say that the US uses half of its labor to produce each of the two goods. So 25,000 hours for wheat, 25,000 hours for computers. That means my production possibilities frontier point is right here in the middle. I can produce 2,500 tons of wheat and 250 computers. Now let's look at Japan. Japan has 30,000 labor hours available per month. They require 125 hours of labor to produce one computer and 25 hours to produce 1 ton of wheat. And we could look at Japan's PPF, production possibilities frontier, graphically. And this is the combination. So interesting. We see the slope, right? The slope difference. If Japan uses half of their time for each product, they can produce 500 tons of wheat and about 120 computers. I'm sorry, 600 tons of wheat and 120 computers. Now, the reason why trade exists is to maximize the production possibility frontier. And so, we use trade in order to receive the supplemental quantities. So first we look at without trade. If US and Japan did not trade with each other, this is what they would end up with. 250 computers in the United States and 2,500 tons of wheat in the United States. In Japan, they would end up with 120 computers and 600 tons of wheat. So we need to understand how much of each product each country needs between these two countries for comparison reasons. So let's suppose the US produces 3,400 tons of wheat. How many computers would they be able to produce for the remaining labor hours? Well, we know it would be lower. And for Japan, let's say they produce 240 computers. Well, how much would they be able to produce in wheat for their remaining labor hours? So we see the shift in the point. US produces more wheat, but less computers. Japan produces more computers, so no wheat. The concept here is that the two countries would be able to share their resources by importing and exporting. Imports are the goods that come into the United States from other countries. That's imports. Goods coming into the United States from other countries. That's an import. An export are goods going out of the United States and into other countries. That's an export. So I'm thinking about those two terms. We would import and export. We would import computers from Japan, and we would export wheat to Japan. So we would export 700 tons of wheat and import 110 computers. What this type of trade allows for is a relationship with the partnering country, and it also allows for the maximization of the production possibilities frontier. So we can see the correlation between the two countries. The United States already producing 160 computers. We can import an additional 110 from Japan. And we can export 700 tons of wheat to Japan. The difference is what's consumed. What's consumed. Consumption represents the amount used within the country. So in the United States, I would utilize 270 computers and 2,700 tons of wheat. But we also see that those 2,700 tons of wheat, it's greater than my production possibilities from here. And when that happens, that says I have excess amount of wheat. I can probably export more to Japan. And on the Japanese side, they produced the 240 computers and they imported 700 tons of wheat from the United States and they exported 110 computers to the United States. That means in Japan, they consumed 130 computers and 700 tons of wheat. We can see that Japan has the ability to import less wheat from the United States. This is where the concept of gains from trade comes into play. The gain from the trade is the difference between the consumption without trade and the consumption with trade. So you take consumption with trade minus consumption without trade equals the gain from the trade. So consumption with trade minus consumption without trade equals the gain from the trade. The gain from the trade is the benefit, which makes the country better off. And we see that everyone wins from trade. Sometimes there's what we call an absolute advantage. As I had said earlier, some countries are better at manufacturing certain products than others. That is very, very true. And when that country is better than manufacturing than the other, we call that an absolute advantage. The United States has an absolute advantage in terms of growing wheat. The U.S. is excellent at growing wheat. Our land is very fertile in the United States, and it has the ability to grow a lot of wheat. So every year, the United States exports a ton of wheat, several tons of wheat, to countries around the world, especially to Japan. But Japan has the absolute advantage when it comes to manufacturing computers. However, the United States also has the ability to manufacture computers. So it's said that the United States has the advantage, absolute advantage over both goods, both wheat and computers. And the reason for that is because in the United States, both can be produced. In Japan, they can't produce the wheat. They can only import it. So in that case, the advantage goes to the United States. So when you think about absolute advantage, I want you to think about which of the two countries has the ability to specialize in the production of its products at the lowest cost. And that would be the country that has the absolute advantage. It looks at the cost of goods with respect to the inputs required to produce it. We know that it takes labor and materials to produce a product. And we also look at the opportunity cost. The opportunity cost, remember, is the cost that is foregone, the cost that we did not go for, the cost we gave up. That's what opportunity cost means. I produced one computer, it cost me 110 hours. I could have used that time to produce 1 ton of wheat. 10 hours to produce 1 ton of wheat. So, that's the opportunity cost. Countries can also have what's called a comparative advantage. Again, one country can specialize in manufacturing, and that gives it a comparative advantage. It's when the country has the ability to produce at a lower opportunity cost than the other. We saw that in the earlier example, Japan has a comparative cost when it comes to manufacturing the computers because it has a lower opportunity cost to manufacture the computers. And that's the concept behind the comparative advantage. So in the US, I could do 10 tons of wheat and 5 tons of wheat in Japan. So the opportunity cost here, we can see that Japan would have the comparative advantage in computers because it costs less in terms of labor to produce one computer. So other things to take into consideration are the gains from the trade. Like, remember, the gains from the trade, we're taking the difference, right? That's where the gain comes into play. And it's also important to understand which countries specialize in what, and that's what gives it its comparative advantage. So, for example, Japan has the comparative advantage for manufacturing computers, and the United States has a comparative advantage for manufacturing wheat. Here's an example with coffee and wine. So Argentina has the ability to utilize 10,000 labor hours per month. To produce 1 pound of wine, it takes 2 hours. To produce 1 bottle of wine, it requires 4 hours. In Brazil, we take the same 10,000 hours, 1 pound of coffee per hour, and 1 bottle of wine for 5 hours. The absolute advantage here for coffee and the comparative for wine. The absolute advantage for coffee, of course, is going to be Brazil because it takes 1 less labor hour to produce 1 pound of coffee. The comparative advantage for wine is going to go to Argentina because it takes less amount of time to produce 1 bottle of wine in Argentina than it does in Brazil. To summarize the chapter, there's interdependence on trade. It's desirable because there's a lot of instances where the costs will be lower to produce in other countries, and that trade impact it benefits everyone. There's a comparative advantage when the cost of the opportunity cost is lower. That creates what we call comparative advantage. So whoever has a lower opportunity cost has the comparative advantage. An absolute advantage is when it takes less time or less input, less time to produce a single unit. That gives an absolute advantage. And it said that the gain from the trade is based on the comparative advantage, not the absolute advantage. Overall, everyone becomes better from trade because there's ultimately lower costs attributed to trade, and both countries or everyone whoever trades benefits from those lower costs. And that's the concept of it. Okay, my friends, that is the end of the 3rd chapter, and interdependence on the gains from trade. Any questions, comments, or concerns so far? Y'all good? Okay. Awesome. Very cool. That makes me happy. All right. So just to remind you where we're at this week in the classroom. So Module 1, Week 2. If you click on Week 2, you'll be able to access both the PowerPoint presentations that we just went over today for Chapters 2 and 3. You'll also find the Chapter 2 homework and the Chapter 3 homework. Again, on average, just a couple of questions, true, false, multiple choice. And you have 2 attempts on each one, so the higher of the two attempts will be accepted in the gradebook. Make sure that you complete both Chapter 2 and 3 homework by Sunday night. For every week, each assignment is due that respective Sunday. And if you ever have any comments, questions, or concerns about anything, you need any help on anything, remember, you can always email me, call me, set up office hours, whatever you need from me. I'm here for you 100% of the time. And with that, I appreciate all of you. I appreciate your time today. I really do. For those of you who joined our course late, if you joined a few days ago, you enrolled late, what I'd like you to do is please to review the recorded lecture from last week. You'll find that in the announcements. And then go ahead and go to Module 1, Week 1, and select Week 1 to review the PowerPoint presentation from Week 1, and then go ahead and take that Chapter 1 quiz. Again, 2 attempts on every quiz and every homework assignment. The higher the 2 grades will be accepted in the gradebook. Any comments, questions, or concerns? Anything at all? Okay. Again, email me, call me, set up office hours, whatever you need. And with that, I would like you all to remember to stay safe, wash your hands, do the right things, and I'll see you all again next Monday at 5:30. Thank you all so much for your time. Appreciate all of you. Take care now. Bye-bye.